So welcome to our next module in Biology 101. This module is why learn about beer. Now, the first thing I want to say is I am not advocating or encouraging or supporting people to drink. That's not what I'm trying to do here. What I'm trying to do is just show you guys how making beer is a biological process. There's a tremendous amount of science that is needed to make beer. We could do the same thing with, let's talk about making soy sauce or wine, or do we want to do a module on why learn about making bread? All these things involve biology. And with the significant increase in craft brewing in the United States in the last 5 to 10 years, this seemed to be a very relevant topic. Again, I'm not encouraging people to go and drink. That's not what this is all about. But it's just trying to say, hey, if anybody is interested, this is the science behind making beer. Okay, so I just want to make sure that's up front. And I just want to present the science and the biology behind making beer. So to find the module, go into the relevancy modules, go to chemistry, get the drop down, go to the module that says fermentation. And this is where all this content will be housed. So let's take a look at why learn about beer. So based on science and the evidence we have at hand, beer and the art of making beer has been part of human culture for over 5,000 years. So this isn't a new thing. Our ancestors, over 5,000 years ago, figured out this process. And what we're doing today is still using the foundational process, but tweaking it, modifying it, adjusting it, doing all sorts of little finesses to it to give us the variety and diversity of beer making we have in society today. Now, financially, home brewing is a multi-billion-dollar industry. There is a tremendous amount of money associated with home brewing, not just selling the equipment and the ingredients, but the sales of the products. Small scale craft brewing, as I mentioned before, has grown significantly in the last 5 to 10 years. And the basic concept behind it, the basic pathway of making beer, is this pathway of fermentation. Now, fermentation is also known as anaerobic respiration, does not use oxygen. And what we're going to see during fermentation, whether it's making beer or making wine or soy sauce or anything that is fermented, you're using typically a single-celled organism. In the case of beer, we're going to use yeast that is going to convert carbohydrates into energy. This makes the yeast happy. That's supposed to be a little smiley. Okay, so the yeast gets carbohydrates, converts it into energy, allows the yeast to then grow and reproduce and make more little yeast. And the byproduct of fermentation is the alcohol. So the same concept applies to making biofuels. Ethanol gasoline. Guys, go fill up your tank with gas, and if you look at the gas pump, a lot of the gas has 10% ethanol blend. That ethanol is an alcohol produced through fermentation. We take corn, ferment the corn, get the alcohol called ethanol, that then goes in our gas tank. This stuff hopefully tastes a lot better what we're making here with beer making hopefully is a lot better than the stuff that we make when we're using it for ethanol fermentation or ethanol production. So as we take a look at this, we want to take a look at the science behind making beer and really fermentation. So things we're going to focus on and take a look at and talk about during this lecture are the different microbes associated with fermentation. That tends to be your yeast. The enzymes. Enzymes associated with fermentation, because you have to break down the carbohydrates. You have to take a polysaccharide, break it down into a smaller and smaller and smaller unit in order for the yeast to be able to turn it into ATP. So we have that pathway, the enzymes assisting the digestion of the carbohydrates. We're going to look at what is fermentation, the actual process of fermentation, and some of the chemistry behind beer, and then the pathway of cellular respiration. So what's the yeast doing? That's cellular respiration. They're using enzymes to break it down and eventually wind up with the beer, right? So that's kind of the trend, or not the trend, the direction of what we're going to focus on here as we explore making beer. So let's take a look at some numbers quickly. So that little table by the numbers that you can find in the book, Beer by the Numbers. Standard drink, you got about 18 milliliters or 6.6 ounces. I didn't realize the previous table had cut off sections of it when it formatted. So here's the full table. About 0.6 ounces of pure alcohol in a standard drink. When we look at a general beer, you got about 5% alcohol by volume. So if you dehydrated, took all the water out of a beer and looked at just the pure alcohol, you got about 0.6 ounces. All right, that's roughly that 5%. Average person, and again, I'm not encouraging or condoning or supporting this, but the average person worldwide, drinking age varies in different countries, but the average beer consumed by each person worldwide, 15 and older, is 120 cans of beer a year. So think about that. That's like 1 every 3 days on average for everybody who's 15 and older. That's a lot of beer that gets consumed. There's approximately 9,000 breweries operating in the United States. Look at the area. Look at around us. How many craft brewers or breweries do we have? I have a cousin in Indiana who owns a microbrew. It's called St. John's Malt Brothers. He craft beer. That's all he makes. And then some of the negatives, we see alcohol consumption can lead to problems, health problems, loss of life, etc., due to health issues associated with alcohol. Volume of beer, about 6 billion gallons produced a year. That's a lot of beer. And then about $120 billion of sales. So a lot of different ways to tie into this. You could do it from the business side. You could do it from the healthcare side. You could do it from the production side, the sales side, the drinking side, hopefully not too much. All different ways, everybody will have a connection to this. And somebody may say, hey, I do not drink. Fantastic. That's totally respectable and that's your right. But do we have to be concerned about other people who do? How does that impact us when other people drink? Think about DUI laws and things like that. So lots of different connections here. This is why I felt this was a relevant topic to discuss and take a look at. But I want to focus not on legal, not on social, not on all that. on the science. I want to focus on and take a look at the biology of making beer. So here is an overview of the process. You start with a grain. Barley is the primary grain that we're going to start with here. Now you'll hear about hops later down the road, but barley is the primary grain that we're going to use for this. And the first step in beer production is malting the barley. So you have to cook it, you have to soak the seeds, get them to germinate, and I'll go through this in a little bit, and get that stuff ready to go. Second step is a thing called mashing. And this is when you've created stuff called wort. And you go through this step called mashing, where the barley gets mashed into wort. You're cooking it hot temperature to actually get the enzymes to trigger to convert carbs into simple sugars. If you're doing hops, this is now usually when that comes in, to basically create that ingredient. And then the third step is the fermenting step. This is where you give this stuff to the yeast or combine the yeast with it and add the yeast in the wort and say, go to town, guys. Take that wort, convert it, break it down, get your energy, but then also the byproduct produced is the beer. All right, so 3 general steps. Malting, actually, should redo this. So malting, mashing, fermenting. All right, so sorry, let me do that. So there's our 3 steps: malting, mashing, and fermenting. Oh, that's supposed to be an arrow pointing to. Hopefully you guys get the idea. Hard to draw with this mouse, sorry. All right, so there's our 3 steps in the process of beer making. But let's start with the barley. I mean, heck, barley's a plant. Barley is a commercially grown crop. Generally, the barley grain is then used for beer making. Sometimes you'll use it in other aspects of cooking, but primarily a lot of it's going to brewing. Now, some people will use it for making flour, not that common. Wheat flour tends to be the most common. And sometimes we'll feed it to our animals, feed the animals barley. But again, a lot of the barley produced in the United States or worldwide is produced to brew beer. The genetics behind barley has changed dramatically in the last several hundred years, growing different strains, different varieties of barley to give us different types of alcohols as the end product. So here's something to think about. All right, we need a plant. We need this producer, this plant, to be able to make beer. So barley is a plant that grows through the pathway of photosynthesis. Now, to do photosynthesis, there's some key things needed. Sunlight. Pretty good. It's there. You have a growing season. Water. How much water? Is the water available throughout the growing season? What happens if you have a major drought during your growing season? That's a huge issue in the production of your crop. Carbon dioxide, we got plenty of that, an abundance of that in this world. No concerns there. Temperature. So there's an ideal range of temperature for barley to grow. Too cold, seeds don't germinate. Too hot, plant dies. So we see all these environmental factors playing a role in the sustainable or the production of this barley crop. Right? So when we get into our next section of the lecture, we'll talk more about planting the barley, harvesting the barley, and then moving it into the malting process.